In a small town in China called Tengzhou lived a widow called Mrs. 𝐿. Her husband had been a smart businessman, and Mrs. 𝐿 was now quite wealthy from the money he had left her. She had only one child, a daughter called 𝐿 Xiangling. Xiangling was a beautiful girl with many talents. Mrs. 𝐿 loved her and wanted the best for her. She always gave her daughter whatever she desired. She didn't realize that Xiangling had become spoiled. The years seemed to fly past, until one night Mrs. 𝐿 looked at her daughter and saw that she wasn't a little girl now. She was 16 years old, a young woman ready for marriage. Mrs. 𝐿 arranged for her to marry a young man from a wealthy family in another town. She then began to prepare for her daughter's wedding. It was the tradition that a young woman took gifts of property and money to her new husband. Mrs. 𝐿 prepared all of this with great care. She wanted her daughter to go to her new home with pride. Mrs. 𝐿 then began preparing her own gift for her daughter. She went to the most expensive store in the town to order a wedding box. The box would be covered in bright red silk and would have a colorful 𝐿𝐵 sewn on the top. A 𝐿𝐵 is an animal that all Chinese people know from ancient stories. A wedding box with this animal on it would promise the birth of a strong and smart son. This would be Mrs. 𝐿's special gift to her daughter on her wedding day. However, it was very difficult to buy anything that would please Xiangling. The color was wrong, or maybe the size. You could be sure that anything her mother bought would have to be exchanged or returned to the store. When the box was ready and the family servant brought it home from the store, Xiangling wasn't satisfied at all. She inspected it with a cold look on her face and said, "I don't like the 𝐿𝐵. The design is all wrong. Take it back to the store." So the servant returned to the store, told them what Xiangling had said, and ordered another box. But when he brought the second box home, she was still unhappy. The colors were too dark. A third box was ordered, but this still didn't please her. Finally, the servant got very upset. "I can't do this again," he cried. "The people in the store laughed at me the last time. They told me that I'm difficult to please, but it's not me. You are the difficult one. You're never satisfied. I'm afraid that if you don't want this box, there's nothing I can do. I'll have to leave and work for another family." Although Xiangling was spoiled, she was not a bad person. She began to feel sorry for the servant. He was an old man and had been a loyal servant to their family since before she was born. So she agreed to keep the box and told him to go back to the store and pay for it. The servant was grateful that she had changed her mind because he didn't really want to leave the family. He went back to the store, paid for the box, and gave it to Mrs. 𝐿 so she could fill it with gifts for her daughter. The 16th day of the 8th month arrived, and it was time for Xiangling's wedding. Xiangling had been looking forward to this day for many months. Her excitement had grown as she watched her mother preparing all the wonderful gifts and her beautiful wedding clothes. But she also felt sad because she knew she was leaving her mother. Early in the morning, her mother helped Xiangling put on her beautiful wedding dress of the finest red silk. She was then taken to her huaqiao. The huaqiao is a special chair which is used to take a woman to her new husband. She sits in the huaqiao, and curtains are closed around her so she can't be seen. The chair is then carried on the shoulders of 4 strong men. Xiangling's huaqiao had beautiful red silk curtains. Mrs. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢 lifted the curtain at the front of the huaqiao to speak to her daughter one last time before she left. "This is your special day, my daughter, and I'm so proud and happy that you look so beautiful and that you're marrying such a fine young man. Here's my gift to you, a wedding box. When you're in your new home, open it and you'll see all the nice gifts I've put inside. I hope that when you do this, you'll feel my love for you." But Xiangling wasn't really listening. She was too busy thinking about her wedding and wondering what her husband, whom she had never met, would be like. She kissed her mother, took the box, and put it by her side. A few minutes later, the 4 men came, picked up the huaqiao, and Xiangling's journey to her new life began. As they came to the main road, it started to rain. Soon it was raining so hard that the road became a sea of mud and it wasn't safe to continue. So the men carried the huaqiao into a shelter at the side of the road to wait for the storm to end. Xiangling was annoyed by the rain and anxious to get to her new home. Then she heard something. Was someone crying? Or was it the sound of the rain? She opened her curtain to see. In the shelter next to hers was another huaqiao. It wasn't nearly as nice as hers, and it had old, torn curtains. And yes, the crying was coming from inside the old huaqiao. This only annoyed Xiangling more. Why is this woman so unhappy on her wedding day? This could bring me bad luck, she thought. So she sent her servant to find out what was wrong with the girl. The servant came back and told Xiangling that the young woman was very sad because she was poor and had nothing to take to her new home. Xiangling then felt sorry for her. She realized that she had always had everything she wanted and that this girl had nothing. It was especially sad because it was her wedding day. Xiangling didn't have any money with her, so she decided to give her the box. She called her servant again. "Here, take this to her, but don't tell her who sent it. Don't tell her my name." The servant tried to stop her. "But Xiangling, this is your wedding box." "Shh, I don't care. Take it to her now, quickly," Xiangling ordered. The servant did as she was told and went quickly to give the box to the girl. The crying immediately stopped, leaving only the sound of the rain. Soon the storm ended, and the men picked up the huaqiao to start again on their journey. Xiangling had given a stranger her wedding box without knowing what her dear mother had put inside. In a few hours, she arrived at her new home, and the marriage took place that evening. She discovered that her mother had chosen well for her. Her husband was a wonderful and handsome young man. After a year of marriage, they had a beautiful, healthy baby boy. Xiangling felt that she must be the happiest woman in the world. But after 6 years, This happiness was destroyed when a terrible flood hit their area. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞 and her family lost their home and everything they owned. In the rush to escape the town, 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞 became separated from her husband and little boy in the crowds. She searched and searched, but she couldn't find them anywhere. So she finally had to accept defeat and travel with other people who were escaping to a town called 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞. It was a long, difficult journey, and 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞 was full of sorrow. She didn't think she would ever see her husband and child again. Life was hard when they first reached 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞, so everyone tried to help each other. One day, as 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞 sat, exhausted and alone by the side of the road, a woman came up to her and said, "You look terrible, and you must be hungry. You can find food not too far from here, just down this road. 𝐿𝐻𝐴, a wealthy businessman, has put up a tent, and his servant is giving food to people who've suffered in the flood. Go now. I'm sure you can get something to eat there." 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞 thanked the woman and went to find this place. When she got there, she found a long line of people holding bowls and silently waiting. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐞 had never done anything like this before in her life. She had never felt so depressed. As she was standing there, holding her bowl and waiting for her turn, she had to force back her tears. Finally, her turn came. 𝐿𝐻𝐴's servant put the last bit of food into 𝐿𝐻𝐴's bowl and then announced to the rest of the people in the line that there was no more food left and they should come back tomorrow. The person behind her began to cry. 𝐻𝐴 turned around and saw an older woman. When she looked at this woman, she remembered her mother. She thought of how much she loved her and how unselfish she had been. Without saying anything, she put her food into the woman's bowl and walked away. She couldn't stop her tears now, and they ran down her cheeks until she could hardly see where she was going. The servant had watched all of this. He was very surprised at what 𝐿𝐻𝐴 had done and ran after her. As she was walking away, 𝐿𝐻𝐴 heard him shouting, "Madam! Madam, please stop!" 𝐿𝐻𝐴 stopped and turned around. The servant then asked her why she had given her food to the woman. She said simply, "I'm very hungry, but I'm also young. I can stand my hunger for longer than that old woman can." The servant smiled. "Well, you did a very unselfish thing. My employer, 𝐿𝐻𝐴, is looking for someone like you to take care of his young son. Are you interested in this job?" "Oh, yes. Thank you," 𝐿𝐻𝐴 replied, feeling happier. "Then come with me now," the servant told her. He then took her to 𝐿𝐻𝐴's house. When 𝐿𝐻𝐴 met 𝐿𝐻𝐴 and heard the servant's story of her great kindness, he offered her the job immediately. He then told 𝐿𝐻𝐴, "My wife is an excellent mother, but unfortunately has had very poor health for some years. This is why we need someone to take care of our young son. You will have a lot of freedom in this job, but there's one place you must never go. That is the small house at the end of our garden. It is my wife's private place. If I ever discover that you've been inside, you'll lose your job immediately. On this one point, I must be very clear." 𝐿𝐻𝐴 agreed to this and began her new life. She liked the little boy. It didn't take long, however, for her to discover that he was very spoiled. He wanted everything immediately, and if he didn't get what he wanted, he cried and cried until he did. This upset 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬 because it reminded her of how spoiled she had been as a child. She regretted now how badly she had behaved. One day, she and the little boy were playing in the garden when his ball went into the little house. The boy began to cry. "I want my ball! Go and get it!" he shouted. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 told him that she wasn't allowed inside the house, but the boy didn't care and just cried louder. She tried again to make him understand. "But your father doesn't allow this. If I go in there, I'll lose my job." The boy wasn't listening. His face was red and wet with tears. He started screaming. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 finally gave up and agreed to go inside. She looked around to make sure no one could see her and then walked quietly up the steps, opened the door, and stepped inside. When her eyes became used to the darkness, she was very surprised by what she saw. It was a temple, calm and peaceful. She walked slowly toward a small table, which was covered with a beautiful yellow silk cloth. On the table was a small Buddha, some pictures of relatives from long ago, and there, in the middle of all this, was her wedding box. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 remembered her wedding day and how happy she had been. She thought of her mother's love and kindness. She thought of her husband and her son and how much she missed them. She had had everything, and now she had nothing. She started crying so hard that her body shook. Suddenly, someone touched her shoulder. Shocked, she quickly turned around and saw a woman's angry face. It was Mrs. Liu, the wife of her employer. A young servant girl was standing behind her. "What are you doing here?" asked Mrs. Liu angrily. "I'm so sorry," 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 answered. "Your son's ball came in here. He was very unhappy. He wouldn't stop crying. In the end, I felt I had to do as he asked and get his ball for him. Forgive me, please. I know that this is your private place." "Why were you crying?" asked Mrs. Liu. "Because I saw the box, my wedding box. My mother gave me this box on my wedding day." Mrs. Liu looked shocked. "Where are you from?" she asked as she picked up the box and sat down in a chair near the table. Her voice now sounded strange, almost happy. "I'm from Tengchu," answered 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡. "What was your name before you were married?" Mrs. Liu asked. "Xie 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐿𝐵." Mrs. Liu said nothing to 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡, but turned to her servant girl. "Bring her a chair," she ordered. The servant wasn't happy at all about bringing a chair for another servant, but she did as she was asked. Mrs. Liu then told 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 to sit down on the chair. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 was surprised to be treated with such honor. She didn't understand, but she was afraid to speak. "And when were you married?" "On the 16th day of the 8th month, 6 years ago." Mrs. Liu was silent for a moment. Her face looked very strange now. Could she be smiling? "Tell me, how did you lose this box?" she asked. 𝐒𝐭𝐨𝐫𝐢𝐬𝐡 then told Mrs. Liu about the terrible rainstorm on her wedding day, the old 𝐭𝐨𝐲𝐬𝐡, and the sad young woman. Suddenly, Mrs. Liu went down on her knees in front of 𝐭𝐨𝐿𝐵𝐢𝐬𝐡 and began to cry. You saved me, she cried with joy. Your kindness on my wedding day took away my worry and brought me so much joy. All these years I've been praying for your health and happiness. When I got to my new home, I opened your box and found many things of great value inside, including this beautiful piece of the finest jade. She took a piece of deep green jade out of the small box and held it up for Xiangling to see. When my husband and I were first married, we didn't have much money. I took this jade to the moneylender and received a large payment for it. That allowed us to start a business, which has made us very rich. As soon as we had enough money, I went to the moneylender and bought the jade back. I've kept it in this box since that time. I didn't know how to find you, so I built this temple to honor you. I've always hoped and prayed that we would meet. I'm so grateful that I can now thank you with all my heart. So please take your box. Your mother must be a wonderful person because she gave you such a special gift on your wedding day. Xiangling cried with happiness as Mrs. Liu put the box into her hands. Mrs. Liu then spoke again. I know that your husband and son are missing. We'll send people out to search for them immediately. I also want you to think about something else. When your family returns, we would like to share our property with you. Please accept this. You'll make us very happy if you do. That same day, 𝐿 sent servants out to search for Xiangling's husband and son. They were soon found, not far from Tengzhou. The two families lived near each other from that time and became very close friends. They were always ready to help each other. As the years went by and Xiangling grew older, she often told the story of the wedding box. She always ended her story with these words. Remember, life moves in circles, and happiness comes to people who help others.